Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 566 of Constructed Criticism. I am here, Abe Stein, joined by my co hosts, Spencer.
Oh, this is an audio podcast. Hello.
Yeah, it is. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And Mason.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, Mason. How are you feeling about the Spider-Man previews? And that's what everyone's talking about. Nothing else happened in Magic this week, so
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I think Doc Ock kind of a flavor win, right? He's got the master plan, 8 cards in hand, pretty cool. Gwen Stacy kind of rocked. Symbiote Spider-Man, fine enough, What are you gonna say? Cause a little mayhem.
Comic-Con kind of exploded this year. It seemed like it was one of the more loved Comic-Cons in a while, and Magic being a presence there is pretty cool.
well, yeah, obviously that's why it was, because everyone loves
Yep.
Magic, and Comic-Con would have been terrible otherwise. But that's not what we're talking about this week. We're not talking about Comic-Con. I'm just joking about Spider-Man being the thing. Edge of Attorneys just came out. The standard RCQ season is commencing, and so we figured we'd talk about our main topic this week, building your deck for week one. Not a better time to do this episode than week one itself. I know there's a lot of people out there who are getting ready for that early standard format. And so, without further ado, let's kind of dive right in. So why make a big deal about week one? You know, how is this different or special? I mean, week one, it's just the first week. Why is that different?
It's funny. I think about the most recent RCQ I won was a week one RCQ. I won multiple state champions week one. SCG opens, you would see a lot of the same people do really well week one. And I think that something that's special about week one is it asks a unique set of questions that, are different than, do I have plans and do I add is something already defined, which are kind of the questions that we often ask ourselves on this podcast all the time about picking a deck.
Yeah, I think that's, week one is so different because there's such an unknown. I think people talk about Wild West formats and always such a happy way. Now, every time I played a Wild West Pro Tour, I don't know, they're really hard because there's so much that you can't necessarily know or control. There's a lot of things to prepare for that you might not even know are out there. But I definitely agree with you, Spencer. Week one, it's so much more about the figuring out what is the grounds that we're competing on, right? Kind of setting the stage for what things are about. And it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the format, right? There's not really a meta game that's defined for you to exploit. You can't just go and net deck moto challenges on that first week when it's the first moto challenge. So I guess, I don't know, Mason, if you have thoughts or anything that strikes you about week one.
It's just always, I think Spencer did a good way of saying it. It tests a different thing, and especially the week one of rotation, right? Which is, I think, a lot of what we're really talking about here. Some of this does apply, I think, week one with a new set, right? But when you lose 4 or 5 sets and gain a new one, it's a dramatic shakeup, right? And even if the sets are weak, losing the lands or the removal spells with a few sideboard cards in them can have some huge impacts. And it's really a time where identifying what is strong, becomes a lot more important, and identifying those kind of things, less so optimizing like we see in mid to late stages of a metagame.
Yeah, I think about what you just said about how the mana changes, and I think that this rotation specifically asks you to know how to count your sources and make quick changes when you're realizing that you have something wrong, and turning knobs on your mana base that, for the most part, when you go as late as we were in the last standard season, it was pretty easy to just copy and paste a mana base, and you probably didn't even need to change the mana base that often when you were changing actual cards in your deck, because the mana became so good for the archetypes. right? And like maybe you like wanted to change a utility land here or there, or like check on your colorless sources, but now you're asked like, hey, you actually there's not like a blueprint for this. What does your mana base look like to cast your spells?
Yeah, you can't do the Hinderrocker, 36 spells, 24 lands. Just leaving it at that. You gotta really dig in. That's definitely, I think, a good one. I don't even think about as actively, but you're right. I mean, drawing yourself towards the mana. We talked about that in the set review last week. Kind of what color pairs have the best mana, what that allows you to do. And I think in general, I mean, as far as how it means you build your deck, right? Like it's about creating and iterating on that idea and what you're trying to do and building from the ground up. It's probably a phrase Mason loves, turning 0 into 1. Finding a way to make your plan really shine. And so I guess talking about 0, the metagame, really, we are at level 0, right? I think that's a phrase that gets put around a lot. What does that mean when we talk about what level 0 is?
I'm a pretty big believer in like level 0. This is something that we did a lot for Pro Tour testing back when Pro Tours were like often week 2 or 3, where we would scope out like, what are the things that we had success with in testing, and we would do like weekends at my house or at Michael's house or Matt or Alex's house or at the store, right? And we would just, I mean, the piles of proxies would add up, and you would develop like, okay, here are the archetypes that make sense. Here's the like, and you have to assume pretty often, in my opinion, and this has changed significantly in the last 15 years of Magic, but like that other people are going to come to those conclusions, and that's what defines level 0. It is the thing that everyone is going to come to the conclusion of, okay, this card or this thing matters in this format, and that's the level that we're basing this off of.
Yeah, often like the most overtly strong, straightforward thing, right? So I think a good example when we look at the current rotation that happened, this week would be like Kaito and Enduring Curiosity, right? Like those are two very straightforward cards, VV Cauldron type stuff, very straightforward, very powerful. Everyone kind of knows about this. It existed before. Does it mean it's the best thing in the format? We don't know, but it's a good starting point and sort of the anchoring point where all your conversations start from, of like, okay, but can you interact with those things profitably? What's your game plan for that? And if you can't account for that, well, yeah, maybe your deck's fine on week 7 or whatever, but we're on week 0 here. We're trying to figure things out. You're going to see a lot of this because some people don't have the time to figure out all this sort of thing, and they're going to just, flock to level 0.
Yeah, I think thinking about level 0, and this is kind of how I thought about it, is the best thing that you can do, right? The obvious, most powerful thing that maybe is the most consistent powerful thing. I think a lot of level 0s historically are like mono red aggro with all the good red cards, because it's a consistent game plan that requires a plan to be beaten and probably has some of the best or most efficient threats. Decks that maybe existed before rotation and now, still kept a lot of their core pieces. So those things are obviously still in the mix, right? It's very easy to just slot in some cards that are similar to the ones that rotated and play a really similar deck. But also, like, I think that in general, it's just about the decks with the most obvious and cleanest plan A, right? I talk about a lot on the show, like A, B, and C plans. I think that really in week 1, it's like about the plan A's of the format clashing. Like decks are not going to be super good at interacting or maybe even having the right answers unless you're doing something, kind of obvious. And what really dictates things is the threats that you have access to, and the problems you're creating for your opponent, right? Whatever your deck is designed to do, doing it as best as it can, leads to a lot more of what kind of level 0 is and what week 1 is about. Because maybe in the first, maybe not literally the first week, but in the first couple of weeks things are out, someone might figure out that, oh, obviously mono red is good, so a deck that's good against mono red is, even better. And so there's a bit of metagame movement just from these initial discoveries. But it's hard to know what to answer when you don't have a picture of what actually can win in the format. And so it's just better to make your opponent like have the right answer for what you're doing, and making sure that whatever you're doing is really powerful. I mean, your deck can still be like a deck full of answers. I think a lot of like week 1 decks that are really we're really successful. I think about like Dominaria's blue-white control with like Fairy Hero of Dominaria, and Settle the Wreckage, and just generally blue-white control in that format was very good because it just had a bunch of good cards. And Teferi, I think, was one of the best things. I think also like the Goldspan Dragon decks when Kaldheim came out that were just leveraging the fact that Goldspan Dragon gave you a clock and the mana to protect it consistently. And while those weren't the best decks throughout the format, and there were other decks that were discovered or tuned to beat the problems in front of them, they were really, really strong week 1 decks because it was hard to get them wrong. They're kind of the easiest ones to figure out how to make them strong.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I don't know what they call this now, but they used to call it block monsters, Mason. I don't know what they call them now, or like things that are encapsulated within like a single set or like 2 sets of a deck, and you then like if those things don't rotate, like you just have that block monster still in the format, right? And so like if something was keeping one of those type of decks out, that's something that you might want to adjust for. And I don't think that we're saying you have to play these level 0 decks for what it's worth, or you can, but I think that the idea is like you need to know they exist and you need to be on top of that.
Yeah, I always tell people too, like when you, especially if you're like busy, and you don't have a ton of time to prepare, level 0 is a great thing to do for your RCQ on that weekend. Be the guy that's like, hey, I'm playing BV Cauldron, or I'm playing Dimir or whatever, right? Prove to me that what you're doing is better than what I'm doing. If you have like an RCQ this Friday, for example, or Saturday, that's a fine place to be if you don't have time. And like identifying, what level 0 is and working from there is good. And, if you want to move on from the next week, that's totally fine. But there's, it's important to identify that and sort of what are their pieces as well, right? Like we've talked about identifying the level 0 nature, but also what are they doing and what are they changing up is important too. So looking, I think towards Dimir and their removal spells is a big thing with this set, right? We lost Cut Down, we lost Go for the Throat, we lost Annoyance Affliction. What's going in the deck now? That's a big thing to look at, and that will help you whether you decide to play level 0 deck or if you decide to switch over to a different deck.
To kind of ask you guys a question on both of your points, do you think that Plan A's like it's funny we say level 0 because like there's a whole entire like magic theory behind it of like level 0, level 1, level 2, and like where you want to be in a given tournament, and that is kind of similar to what you're saying, Abe, about like clashing Plan A's. But is there something to be said about like I don't think there is. So let me give my answer first, and then I'll ask it. Like I don't think it's worth it to like have a plan for somebody else's plan. Like I don't want to be on level 2 ever on week 1. And I'm kind of curious, like when you talk about removal, for example, Mason, like I don't want to like play a threat that dodges the removal spell that's going to be the most popular, and then think, well, this other removal spell can beat it, so I'm going to dodge this. I'm going to swerve after that. I think that that's a lot of wasted effort.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people they should try to look at like what are the 2 best removal spells at like the first 4 thing, and I mean that's like probably the most popular or most efficient. So a good example of this might be like, let's say Torch the Tower or Seam Rip / Tragic Trajectory, depending on where you sort of land on things. It's like okay, those are like 2 good 1-mana removal spells. What do they answer? All right, let's look at 2 mana. Okay, I think it's these cards. 3 mana, 4 mana. What is the Wrath doing, right? And what you're saying, Spencer, about like, okay, let's say Preacher of the Schism is what we land on. It doesn't die to anything except one of the kill spells, and it's perfectly thought, but it's like, well, maybe someone could play this edict or whatever, or this card that targets 3 mana cards. And it's like, if they want to do that, fine. You just kind of want to, as you're kind of saying, approach things from sort of the baseline, because everyone has to sort of start from zero. And the amount of like divergent places you can go from here is so wild and so out of control, right? Like, what if, you think it's this, so you play some weird 4 mana card to dodge everything, and it turns out you're wrong and it's lay down arms, right? What if that's secretly the best kill spell? Now you've kind of backed yourself into this awkward corner. So approaching things sort of, from the base level where most people are coming from, I think is sort of the best way, and not, zigging and zagging, the other way where people are trying to do stuff at least level week one beyond the first obvious stuff.
And I think like a good way that I've tried to think about it and like modeling this in my own head of how players are thinking about building their decks, especially as I'm reading deck lists early on in the format, is like oftentimes when you see people start to play cards you weren't already thinking of, it's because they had a specific reason to say that, okay, this looks like the best thing on paper. Maybe, I should just be playing as many of this removal spells as possible, and this is the best one. But then someone presents a problem that requires them to make a concession to that problem and change that card, right? It's not until they know what the problem they're going to have is that they know what the better card for them to play some mixture of to hedge in a direction is going to be. So don't try to react to that hedge. I think you're right on the money, Spencer. Like, if you're spending time trying to sidestep the what's already possible and be like, oh, well, I need to make sure to cover all my bases, you don't even know if those bases matter, right? It's kind of Calvin ball. Like, you don't know if these things are actually going to help you win, because you can't know what the shape of things are going to look like and what's going to be important.
I also think that what you both said, sorry, I hate to keep going on this point, but like I like the idea that we're like hedging one way or another. So like a really good example of like a card that might be a hedge is Fire Magic over Pyroclasm in this format, right? But like they're not actually actively that different of Magic cards in the grand scheme of things. And so like if that's something that your deck worries about, it's probably going to worry about all of the varieties of Fire Magic. It's not going to care that much more that one of them is Fire Magic.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like, Pinnacle Starcage is a card that is poised to replace Temporary Lockdown. And knowing that, like, okay, do I need to play more 3-mana threats to avoid getting lockdown? But also, how many decks are really going to like play this card? If I'm going to lose to a card like Pinnacle Starcage, I'm going to lose to a card like Pinnacle Starcage. I should just plan for that. And that probably applies to, Fire Magic, to Pyroclasm, to any amount of cheap sweepers. And so thinking about the game a little bit more on the macro, because people are just going to bring those kind of macro answers because they don't have a clear vision of what they're actually playing against. I think that really does, that's very different about week one or like a rotation in general compared to other weeks, because you don't know enough to play those more specific answers. Like maybe people aren't even going to bring cards like Pinnacle Starcage because maybe all the mono red decks are just going to have too many 3-mana threats, or like are going to lean on enchantments to summon them, so they're not actually getting exiled by this, right? Like there's too much opportunity for you to get punished for making it about the wrong thing as opposed to just playing the generic good cards. Speaking of like generic good cards, I guess we kind of talked about at good length here, like what level 0 is. So what are kind of the different flavors of level 0? I think personally that it's a lot about, right, plan A. It's about threats. I think it's also about consistency. That's like kind of another piece of that. Simpler decks with simpler mana bases, I mean, you talk about mana, really lend themselves to being clean and efficient and just working. So your deck is going to work more often, rather than kind of trying to figure out a way to make your mana work for a splash, for a thing you think you need. Just sticking to those things and playing, cards that are, good on rate is one approach. But also, there's a lot of, synergies that you could kind of lean into. Um, I think about like Toxic being a deck recently. Talk about like block monsters, like you said, Spencer, like a deck that really kind of exists on its own and stands alone. Um, like those are kind of known quantities, or those are things you can really start to build towards. How do you kind of determine where you want to be?
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this and I was like, you know what probably is a real block monster that didn't lose any of its threats was actually lizards from like really early on in standard. But then I thought, wait a second, but didn't lose like all of its mana? Like, does it actually even have like a dual land? Like, I don't even know. And I actually don't know. I was thinking about that during this episode. And, kind of going about like, what is the fastest thing that can happen that people will reasonably do, right? Like, not some convoluted like turn 3 deck. I think a good example of this is like, I think mono red. I'll just use mono red as an example of like how fast is the mono red deck? What does the mono red deck look like? And or maybe it's white aggressive. Whatever you identify as like the one of the level 0 aggressive decks, and then you go to like, okay, what does the mana support? I did some playing today, for example, and I'll just use today's examples of like, we have we talked about this during the set review, and I encourage everybody to listen to the part at the very beginning where I talk about what every color combination gets. But it has led myself and some people that I trust to believe that it might be possible that we might be in like a single color versus a couple of 2 color versus 3 color formats. So like, depending on your mana availability might dictate your deck more so than your threats and things like that. I use lizards as an example because can you eat, like, yeah, you have all of the lizards. Like, probably every good lizard is still in standard, but can you even play lizards? Like, is that even possible? And I think that's a really interesting version of level 0 that comes outside of what you were asking, Abe, because we are now dictated by a bunch of splits in the type of mana that we have. But it's also part of Magic. Like, that's the basis that the game is on. So now we have speed, then we have mana, and then I would say just like, I don't know, the next part of level 0 to me, like you said, is like consistency. I guess that's kind of the mana part, but a good example of this is like, I've had a bunch of people send me ramp decks for this new standard format because they know I love ramp, and it's like, I don't know that we're in a format where I'm comfortable casting Farseek or Rampant Growth, because if they already have a I don't know, they already have an otter in play, like, I'm just in big trouble. that's just a lot of pressure. So,
and I think, you saying that, I think another way to phrase it that listeners would, long-time listeners podcast would really probably appreciate is like, week 1 and level 0 is really about kind of defining the rules of engagement for the format, right? Like, this is where it's kind of hashed out. Maybe we know that all these rules exist. We like know that even though they did ban cards from it, the mice package is still a really strong aggressive package. It's still going to be really consistent. The Dimir deck is still going to be able to find a way to disrupt you and start drawing more cards than you. These are still things that you have to contend with in the format, but week 1 is an opportunity for those things to kind of define their importance and their relative strengths. And I think like what you said there about mana and figuring out like which of these you want to engage in is really about what rules do I think are most important to follow, and what am I making my opponent have to respect.
Yeah, I think you have to do something pretty special to like break the level 0 rules that like we establish as like a baseline. Like, I think you have to be doing something pretty spicy. So, I also think that what you said about just like good card piles is probably the other thing that would wrap up the question. I don't know if it's in the show notes. One of the things that I had put in here, I don't see it in the show notes, was kind of like the idea of good cards versus synergies. I played against a deck that I was going to send a screenshot to Mason. I played against a sacrifice deck today, and it took me all of 35 seconds to realize how good Agatha's Soul Cauldron was against that deck. And I was like, okay, is that going to be an experience that happens multiple times? Like, are there going to be decks that like are trying to do these synergy things that not only does my Agatha's Soul Cauldron break up, but that like are weak to the card in general? And that is one of the unique things about this format, is that we do have a powerful card like that is part of level 0, that is both its own synergy maker and also a hate piece for graveyard decks. It also breaks up your opponent's synergies. It does a unique thing. So
Yeah, I got the Soul Cauldron, someone's Vagavoss Faithful today. Like the 4-mana sack return thing from your graveyard. And because my black-white sacrifice deck has Agatha's in it because of the activate creatures. And so I sacrificed my stupid Time Color Abe and got back my Sephiroth and was like, oh yeah, sacrifice my stupid token, draw me a card, you know? And so it is, you know, it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, when it really hits me kind of like it's like a level 0 thing, right? With like Agatha's, where it's like when they're powerful, but also interact in ways that aren't traditional, right? So interacting, I would say, with enchantments, graveyards, exile, those sort of things really do add weird texture to stuff, right? Like warp creatures would be a lot worse if we had Wasteland Strangler in the format, right? Like they might still be good, but it would like change the way everything goes. And you really have to kind of appreciate that, I think, when you're like early on. And there are like a lot of like, oh yeah, that's in this format moment, right? Where, oh yeah, this interaction does happen. And it happens to everyone. You know, like I never thought about turn 1, just like spend a black, lose 2 life, and warp out my timeline color until like I was just in my hand turn 1. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I can shock myself and them on 1. Do I want to do that? You know, and just like that's a much more basic example, but like it's going to happen all the time, even with the cards in your own deck that you've thought about a ton, or it's like, oh dang, my questing druid gets a bunch of counters. Maybe I should be in Agatha's deck, right? Just things of that nature.
And when it comes down to it, I guess, how do you kind of know which side of that you want to be on? If we're talking about like decks that are more, you know, like decks like Dimir, which are more just pound for pound strong, or decks like a black-white sacrifice deck that are more synergistic. I mean, what are some of the things that kind of pull you in either direction in a situation like we've won?
I know for me personally, it's a mixture of a couple things. One, it's like how much time do I have, right? If I got like a busy work and life week, you know, I'm probably going to be a lot more likely to be demiring, right? If I've got some time, then that's going to maybe lead me to potentially be more in the synergy camp. Also, what is my synergy enabling, right? Is this synergy something that's like game winning, or is it a lot of value, or is it like a 2-card package I can put in multiple decks, right? Like I think when we think of synergies, we often think of Splinter Twin, right? Just like, oops, I won, right? But you can have synergies that I think a good example is sort of like Pixie and Stormchaser's Talent, right? Or a better example probably was This Tiny Big Enough and Stormchaser's Talent from before, right? Like that is just a thing you can put into decks and then have. So whenever I'm kind of doing that, it really depends on like what is the payoff and sort of how much time do I have, and also what do I believe, you know, the relative strength of the other thing to be. Sometimes you're in low power formats, and I'm like, yeah, I Kaito, Curiosity, you know, VV, they're fine or whatever, but I think this is pretty good. And sometimes, like I think right now, it's more like, yeah, the VV, Kaito, Curiosity stuff, this is really good. Like, you know, is it beatable? Totally, I can easily imagine stuff, but you've got to really mean it, and I'm gonna make you mean it in week 1. You know, and like that's kind of where I land if I was like trying to play a tournament. You know, so
I think that I'm pretty close to Mason here, and the word that like came to mind as you asked this question was cohesion. I don't really know that it matters if you're a synergy deck or if your deck has a lot of synergies, as long as it's cohesive. And what I mean by that is like putting like a bunch of like derpy weird synergies together, I have to be pretty confident that that package comes together and works. But if there's a cohesive way to build my deck that synergizes on its own with like every individual part, I think that a good example is what you just said about Pixie, right? That deck just worked together. I didn't care most of the time what I was balancing with Pixie or this town, because it was always going to be a positive exchange for me. So those type of synergies, that's just powerful. That's not even like that. You're not even risking anything to get the biscuit here. You're just handed the biscuit. Sometimes with gravy, and it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, for me, what you said there, Spencer, like, what's the floor of the synergy I'm trying to enable, right? Is my synergy that maybe, like I said, like a sacrifice deck where I'm kind of a bit vulnerable to specific types of interaction, and also some of my cards might be, you know, lower in quality than my opponent's good cards, like good stuff cards, and like how much ceiling am I getting, and is it going to be easy for me to get that? You know, like it's different when your payoff is a card like, you know, as a creature like Sephiroth, compared to when it's, you know, an enchantment or, you know, like a planeswalker that's more difficult to interact with. I don't really have an example off the top of my head, but like those make a big difference. If everyone's gonna be playing a bunch of Doomblades and your payoff is something that doesn't die to this removal, that is most of what the interaction you're gonna play against is, well then that's a good reason to maybe lean into playing some weaker cards to get to play a threat that at level 0 is going to get more mileage and be more consistently powerful, right? It's not that you're necessarily not going to get interacted with, it's that you want to make sure that you're still resilient to that and you're going to do the powerful thing enough.
Yeah, I also hope that I didn't come across this talking people off of sacrifice decks, because that 3/2 is actually really good. I was just using an example of something that happened today, and I think that, like, the fact, just to use sacrifice as another positive example, if the 3/2 is just a good Magic card, what's the name of it, by the way? I should not just call it the 3/2. It's
Zealot.
Yeah. Anyway, if that card is good, then like it's not asking a lot to play testing robots. It actually becomes not that big of an ask, right? And that's the cohesion that I'm looking for. Is that like, well, my nesting robots are already
nesting bot.
Is it nesting bot? Thank you.
Yeah,
it's so just confused. The full clanker, man. I don't know. Like if my nesting bots are just good, like can be good on their own, like if they block multiple times, things like that in the right matchups, if they start max speed really early, like that's the type of cohesion that I want. Is like my cards are good on their own, and then when they're together, you're just in big trouble. So I was not trying to talk people off of sacrifice. I was just stating that I
but I mean, you look at a card like you know, like Nesting Bot and like Umbral Caller Zealot, and you compare them to all of the other 1 and 2 mana threats in the format. Pound for pound, they're not going to be as strong. But when you start to pair them with some of the, you know, higher effort, higher power cards, that's where it starts. Right, that's just a synergy deck, right? Like when you're comparing it to like Emberhearth Challenger. I mean, Challenger also is a great source of value. That also is, you know, a hasty prowess creature that draws cards and works through Rockface Village, right? Like there's a lot of other options you could play, and it doesn't look nearly as good on paper, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that like there's actually like a pretty clear example in this format, and it's deck we've all talked about today already, for like the 3 kind of decks you can have, right? Like at a core for what we're describing. So like synergy decks, like the sacrifice deck. So if I assemble multiple of my pieces, I invalidate everything you've done before, right? Like today I had an opponent out 20 something, and end of turn I stacked my whole board, untapped, surveilled everything away, and then just brought it all back and did it all again. They died. You're dead. All of my pieces together were insurmountable, basically. Then there's the polar opposite, which is Dimir. Like, hey, individually my cards are just pretty much better than your cards. You know, like my Spyglass Siren is just, you know, one of the better utility 1-drops. You know, my Flood Pit Drowner is a great 2-drop. All right, my Kaito, my Curiosity, this is going to win me the game, and I'll just use some kill spells to get across. And then there's decks that kind of tried to combine both of these with something like Esper Pixie, right? Where Pixie is like, hey, I'm playing some of the cards like you are with like Kaito, Curiosity, stuff in that vein, you know, but also I have some synergies built in,
And when you get these things to line up, I am stronger than Dimir, but I'm weaker than these way over the top decks, right? And that's sort of like a triangle experience that you have with a lot of, I guess a line's a better example, and lots of decks fall in between on the line. It's just right now I think we have a clear like beginning, end, and middle, and there's lots of stuff. Like I think Golgari, for example, is a deck that has some weird synergies, right? But is much closer to Dimir than it is to, let's say, Pixie, for example, on the line. And that's just like the nature of these formats and things.
Yeah, and I think that there's things outside of the things that we've talked about, and we're thinking about like Caretaker's Talent or Jeskai Control as like these other ways to engage in the format to like kind of break this paradigm that we've presented here, and they exist. Like you can do them, and like if you believe that that's the best thing and the most important thing, and that's what the format is about, nothing's stopping you from doing those type of things.
Yeah, and I think Mason, the idea of like a spectrum that you're kind of falling on and how that pans out is really important to keep in mind, right? That's how formats always are. They're always kind of exist decks always exist on some kind of spectrum, be it on speed, be it on synergy, be it on however. There's always a range that's going to be represented, which kind of brings me to our last point here in the notes, which is how do you go about once you have maybe picked an archetype or picked a deck and know where you want to be on that spectrum? How is it that you build a sideboard? Right, we've kind of talked about how there's not maybe a ton of information out there. What are things that you're looking to when you're finishing out your 75 and you're building your deck, preparing for your RCQ? Like, what are the things that you look towards for your sideboard?
Hammers, especially early on. Like, does this just kind of like solve a problem for me? So a great example I think of this is like Rest in Peace, right? You hear about a Song of the Sacrifice deck the whole time. You're a white deck with no graveyard synergies. Rest in peace in them, get them. Maybe it's not the best thing you could be doing, but that it sort of solves the graveyard problems when decks are heavy on that. So I would like jump in that kind of direction, especially if I'm low on time. Do I have a card that seems to pivot my game plan while complementing it, right? So we've seen Enduring Curiosity be a sideboard card from blue-red decks, where it's like, hey, even though I don't heavy on creatures, I've got enough little guys around, and this lets me play a grindier game. I want to do stuff like that. And then the kind of the classic bread and butter, like things that these archetypes typically play, I will look for the analogous comp and then play them, right? So one that's almost always in the standard, I think, is Negate. When I'm playing a blue mid-range deck, almost always week one, I have a Negate or two in my sideboard, because I know historically that kind of thing is good. And even though I don't know all the problems that are going to present themselves to me on the weekend, this is something that I know traditionally will cover enough space and I'll be happy with it. Even though maybe I'll look back, when I have the information, like, dang, I really wish I had a bunch of Disdainful Strokes instead. Everyone was playing Overlords, and maybe I even know that now, right? Maybe I do think about the Overlords, but then I, didn't consider some other things. So looking towards those kind of traditional good cards that are in your sideboard. Duress, I think, is another great example where I'll just have maybe one more Duress than I normally would, because it's like, well, it's a good enough card. It covers enough space. That's the kind of stuff I look for on week one.
I love all of those. I think the only ones that I would add are like sticky things that gain advantages. I think that kind of falls into your Enduring Curiosity. But I found myself putting Ral into stuff a lot today. Just as like, yeah, like this sticks, and like it can come in like these spots, and it's kind of hard to deal with. And then the other one is things that are both threats and answers at the same time, so that they're flexible. It's kind of like being broader, but it's a little bit different. So like an example of this is, I found myself wanting Scavenging Ooze in a few decks instead of the second Ghost Vacuum. There were a couple of reasons that I won't get into, but things that flesh out my main game plan while also allowing me to be interactive for a specific type of thing. It is a little bit different than being broad because it's not sweeping, but it is flexible. So
Yeah, I think a lot about just that it was a piece of wisdom I got from listening to Table for Two that Alexander Hayne said, which was that just in general in sideboarded games, like decks, decks that are fast will slow down to respect the fact they're going to get interacted with a bit more, and decks that are slow tend to speed up in a lot of matchups because they know that they're going to have to deal with decks that are trying to get under them, so they need to adjust accordingly. And I think about like building my sideboard like that. I want to make sure that all of the cards that I have are either solving a problem I know I need to solve, like you said, Mason the Hammer, like Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void. Even Leyline might be it depends on how extreme you think the graveyard problems are, but like, you know, having some form of dedicated graveyard hate, not going to be something you regret. You know, having some form of negate or disdainful stroke, ways to counter, you know, powerful, you know, non-creature or creature spells or whatever, just big things that are getting cast at you that are probably more powerful than your things. Not going to regret that. Duress, you're not going to regret that, right? These are cards that have a lot of applications. Same with like maybe adding another cheap removal spell or two if you're worried about playing against aggressive decks. Not getting too complicated and not you know, overthinking things, and you know, maybe going with a couple of versatile cards where, you know, sometimes, like to your point, Spencer, maybe Scavenging Ooze isn't the best graveyard hate, and maybe it's not the best threat for your sideboard, but sometimes you're going to play a game where you want to sideboard, right, play match where you want a sideboard to have a couple of more threats that maybe if I draw them alone can do a little bit more, and also you want to have more cards against graveyard decks. Like those two things can exist in tandem, and so, you know, that Scavenging is a great solution to that, even if it is a little bit less efficient, because you don't know necessarily how bad you're going to need it. Same thing with like Ral, right? Ral is a really flexible planeswalker. It can either generate some incremental advantage on the board, or, you know, shape your hand, or threaten the game on its own. That's like a really powerful combination of things to be able to have, and changes the speed at which you might be progressing your game, if that's the way you're going about it. Anything else that we wanted to cover in this about week one?
I just would encourage people, like, if you listen to this podcast and you're like, I don't know, I can't speak to your financial situation, but like if you're hesitant like Craftwise, like this is like a really fun time in Magic that is worth any type of investment that you can make into it. And I understand the fear that some people might have, but it is a special time that we only get every, what is it, 3 years right now?
No, you get every year. You get rotation.
Like this one though?
Yeah.
All right.
Every year.
I don't remember. I'm tired.
The next one I think is a bit delayed as they align the schedule with the calendar year.
Yeah, it's like 2 months delayed next time. It will be 2027 when we have our next rotation.
Okay.
Or excuse me.
Maybe that's why I thought it was every couple years.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the thing. Either way,
yeah, you're good.
You only get this every so often, and it's a really fun special time where it's almost like if imagine you're a sports fan and it's the off season and your team can be the champion or they can be the worst team in the league, and there's nothing stopping you from believing either thing. That's what Magic is right now for your favorite card or deck or whatever.
Yeah, and since we're bringing this up, I guess I'll address the people who do need to worry about the financial stuff. I've had a lot of coaching clients bring it up that, like, less that it's an issue and more not wanting to get got. I think one of the things that we probably all knew but didn't really talk about in this episode is, like, we talked about week one. It's not like week two we've solved all these things perfectly, right? It typically takes, I think, 2-3 weeks for these things to even hit actually in healthy format, solve states, right? Sometimes it's like, every challenge top 8 had like 5 of this and no one's sure what we're supposed to do. We have no good kill spells. That's pretty rare these days, especially in 3-year standard. Just have more cards.
But I highly suggest waiting 2 weeks minimum if that is something. I know it sucks to miss this fun time because I agree with Spencer. It's one of my favorite times of the year to play Magic. I played so much Magic today in my free time. I'm probably going to play some more Magic tonight after I get done exercising. I might even, while I'm on the treadmill, get a little bit more in and try and get a draft because I haven't drafted yet because I've been doing so much standard. So I fully agree with Spencer. If you can, it's a super fun time, at least personally, I believe it to be. But if you need to be financially conscious, please do wait probably more than just like the first round challenge results. Like the first top 8 starting right about now. Don't just buy a deck if you're financially constricted. Wait at least, a week or so. Let us have some time as a community to try stuff out because it will change up if we're in a healthy format. And if not, might be.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to remember there's a spotlight in Orlando that happens in just a few weeks. That's really our I think it's going to be the most pressure. Mason talked about pressure on the format a lot. That's going to be a thing that really puts pressure on the format and shows what the standard format might look like. And then, even after that, later into the fall, there's another spotlight a bit later at Baltimore, which is, now we're talking almost a full set afterwards, but there's going to be events throughout the rest of the year when it comes to standard and as you're approaching your RSQ system that will give a lot of good information on what the metagame looks like outside of just what's happening on Magic Online, where sometimes it leads to a lot of people copy pasting whatever deck won, right? A lot of people just playing Dimir because it's easy for them and it's what they're used to, or what have you. But you don't have to wait long. But I'd say, just as a good rule of thumb, at least for this one, after Orlando is where I'd really start to say, okay, now we know what the metagame looks like right this second and where it might be going, and you can make a really informed decision there.
So first 5-0's in, Dimir. The first 5-0 dump, it's only Dimir. The timing is very weird. I think it was up for like an hour and a half, and so it's just one deck, even though I think other decks have 5-0'd.
I will
looking it up.
Format solved.
I will say, I'm going to give a really recent example of something, because I would also say, in addition to what Mason said, don't doom and gloom. Like, I remember people being like, Standard's the worst, Magic is broken, it's the worst thing ever, when Domain dominated for like a week and a half. Or maybe it was like 2 weeks, not that long ago. Turned out, not that big of a deal. Everybody said, there's no way we can beat this. I can't go over it, I can't go under it, I can't do anything, and blah, blah, blah. And there were just doomers all over the place. Calm down. Calm down. Before you make the post, calm down.
That being said, how am I supposed to beat Torch the Tower today? That's just driving me crazy. I'm trying to play a 3-2 for 2.
Torch the Tower, real good, man. I don't know what to tell.
Yeah, I don't know, Mason, have you tried them not drawing it?
No, it's Agatha Soul Cauldron. I sacrificed the homies to the squad.
True. See, you already got it figured out. Mason's already broken the format. He's already on level 1.
Yeah,
Dude,
then they sacked something to bargain, and then I jumped off a. And then...
I had an Agatha Soul Cauldron active against is it Enduring Vitalities though I won?
I think so, yeah.
And they were like, wait a second, does this work how I think it works? And I was like, yeah, it does. You're done. He's like, I can't attack or block. I was like, yeah, good luck. It was really funny. They conceded like 3 turns later. They're like, all right, I guess my plan was not going to come together. So, yeah.
That card's a lot better when it's a creature before it's an enchantment. Anyway, that's going to do it for our main topic, building for week 1. This show, CC, is brought to us by some fantastic sponsors. Spencer, why don't you tell the people about it?
Yeah, so by the time this podcast is up, our new code for Mana Traders will be CCMTG6. And if you're a long-time Mana Traders user like me, or if you become a loyal member, you actually have access to the cards either, I think tomorrow is the time of the recording, but by the time this podcast goes up, it's already up. So you can test Standard on that rental service already. That will be what we record on Concerted Clash this week. It's going to be very fun. I'm very excited. And then Untap.gg is our other sponsor. We appreciate them. You can use the link in the show notes. And we get a little kickback every time you do, and we appreciate it. They are a deck tracker service. If you've never played Hearthstone or don't, like, what is that? It's a very cool feature that allows you to like see your deck, your percentages in real time, and it's very helpful when testing and thinking about plays. And then finally, the swag store. We have a playtesting team of patrons that like to qualify for our season and stuff, and we're doing a challenge over the next week or so to play against each other with the new standard format, and the winner will be getting something from the swag store. It's cool to be able to give back to the patrons and things like that. So check out the swag store. The link should be in the show notes, or if you're on YouTube, you should actually just be able to click directly onto the thing you're trying to buy. That's
awesome. Well, the point of the show not only is to talk about week 1 standard Agatha's Soul Cauldron, but is hashtag always improving, where we talk about what we've been doing to get better at Magic or just improve in our own lives. So that is the point of the show. Spencer, since you just gave that promo, I'll give you. I know you're a bit froggy in the throat today. So Mason, what have you been doing this week?
Yeah, so to improve itself, I've been trying to be a bit more efficient with my time, in specifically the sense of like having dedicated time and doing something. My life's been like kind of crazy busy, and I realized I was letting some stuff fall through the cracks, so I'm trying to stay on top of that. And that also does mean sometimes like cutting corners a little bit, in the sense of like normally I like to fully dedicate like myself to like what I'm doing, especially if it comes to like testing Magic. But today I had to get like a couple other things done while playing for like an early part of it, and so it was one of those things where I kind of needed to just be there. So I sort of double task. I sort of played some while sort of thinking about and answering these questions I needed to for this other thing going on. And just in general, I'm trying to make sure that I am doing everything that needs to be done. I talked before about like the idea of like I'm not gonna do anything until this is done, right? In my free time, etc. But sometimes when you have like responsibilities pile up, because playing the new format is a responsibility of me, right? Like I need to kind of learn to be able to talk here on the show and coaching and stuff like that. And so now it's like a weird time where I have multiple responsibilities. I need to be able to kind of double task and be a bit more efficient with that. So I've been doing it. And then the sort of second part is really trying to be efficient with note taking as well. Basically took notes on every single game I played today, during and after, and like everything I sort of sideboarded. And so I could track sort of, what do I want to be doing with my blue black deck or with my pixie deck, right? And sort of thinking just in game and rank this down, like didn't warp my time color because I thought it'd be better to be 1 mana sack next turn. Opponent played Agatha and ate it on turn 2. Was that even good for them? Don't know. Need to think about it, right? And it's sort of one of those things where it's like, okay, I'll come back to that later. Think about, was that spot even good for them to do that? Is that an exchange I'm happy with them doing? Or is that something where I should have been pretty sad about it happening, right? I could have spent a mana, lost 2 life, and played around the Agathas, but then they maybe play something different. So didn't have time to problem solve that after the match like maybe I normally would like to. So I'm going to go back to it later. And I think that's something that doesn't get done enough in Magic, and I need to do more, especially when I'm testing it. So those are kind of my 2 parts of one always improving.
I love the note-taking one. I had a coaching session last week of somebody that you've actually coached in the past, Mason. And one of the things I was like, hey, if we're going to do it this way, I would really encourage you to take notes during your games, because it's going to increase your efficiency of your limited time. And that might sound weird because it takes time to take notes, but what it does is it tracks the things that you're doing better, and it puts them in your head better, and then it can be referenced later for ease of use. And I think that like the payoffs for that type of stuff, as somebody like me, I have a writing disability, so it's actually really hard for me to take notes. But I even see the benefits of it, even though it takes me longer than it probably takes anyone else. I mean, not anyone else, but like a lot of people. So I really love that one, Mason.
Hey, what about you?
Yeah, so my always improving this week is actually in the same vein of just efficiency with time as yours, Mason, but in a pretty different way. Um, this week, I have started what will be a bit of a project of organizing my collection that I keep at home. I have like access to a lot more cards that are kind of spread out across two friends who I share a lot of cards with. But a lot of the stuff that I need is in this office and in this room in 5K boxes that have been sorted by we'll say the memories in my mind. Like I could tell you exactly where the deck that I played, like the sealed deck that I had for a PTQ on day 2 of a Grand Prix in 2014 is in these boxes, but I couldn't tell you how many copies I have of, let's say, Wooded Foothills. And that has led to me, like, I was really reflecting on it before leaving for Vegas, that it took me just so much longer than I felt like it should have to really know where everything was. And I think that since COVID, I haven't really sat down and organized what it is I have. And so as I'm kind of looking to insure some of the more expensive stuff in my collection soon, and also want to make sure that I'm not going through the experience of looking for my like one textless negate for an hour, like that shouldn't be a thing that takes me an hour. So yeah, I've started that this week as one of like the low-hanging fruit things that I think are going to give me a bit more time to focus on what I want to in Magic, and really making the most of kind of falling down to I say falling down, but like being at a point where I'm not qualified for the next RC and I have a bit more time to take my time with Magic and what's important, and really just evaluating, where can I make this an easier thing for me to keep on building on. So that's what I've been doing this week. How about you, Spencer?
I've got a 5K box in my trunk and I haven't taken out since the move, babe. So just in case you want to know.
It'd be like that sometimes.
It's just sitting there. Every time I'm like, I should take this upstairs. I'm like, I don't want to carry this. So I'm gonna go to some life stuff, and I'm gonna get real honest. And this is actually one that is a repeating, always improving. If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you know that I love ice. It's very important to me. Every podcast you probably see me drink from a big giant glass of ice water. And one of the things that is really important in the idea of always improving is habit building. It's about doing these things again and again. And when I lost my ice maker from the move, we bought some pretty cool ice trays and some ice boxes for our freezer so that we had ice that are kind of really, really nice and easy to use. But I have to regain the ability to make constant ice. Not because, like, ice is hard to make, but it's time consuming. And then the other thing is, like, a long time ago, I had the habit when this podcast, not when it started, but a couple of years after, where every time I entered the kitchen, I would empty the ice tray and fill it up again. Every single time. I would just do it so that I always had ice. And we got a lot of really good feedback about that always improving moment at the time. And I think that it's really hard to go backwards when it comes to things that are quality of life upgrades. When I no longer had to do that due to my financial situation, due to my I've bought ice makers before. I've done things to change that. It's really hard and taxing mentally to do that. But I found the last week or so that when my wife and I tag team it and we do it together, that everyone's happier in the house. Because my daughter, because of me, is also an ice water fiend. She also always needs an ice water in front of her. And there are some things that you do that are just worth it. It probably wouldn't matter. This isn't the ice I prefer, right? Like I would much rather just go buy ready ice every single day and just have a bag of ready ice every day. But like I'm not paying that much for ice. That's just not a thing. But what I can do is adjust my behavior for a quality of life upgrade to always have this thing. And when you apply that to Magic, it's kind of like eating your veggies, except you get immediate gratification, which is pretty cool. So
yeah, and I think it's just those habits. Like that's something that we talk about a lot at my job is just like building routines and habits. And when you have something like that, it can be really hard to rebuild it. So it's definitely being intentional about it and also getting like seeing the value in it is really important. So I'm glad that that's something you've been able to rebuild. Speaking of seeing the value, though, you can always support the show on Patreon. It will always be free, but patrons do get access to the Patreon question. So they're able to send us in questions for us to answer here towards the end of the show. And this week's Patreon question is from Yan Monster, who asks, what are your 2 must-listen podcasts at the moment?
okay, I'm gonna go first, and I want to preface this that I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. I'm going to tell you the best podcast to ever exist that you can binge listen to, and then I'm going to give you a Magic podcast. The best podcast of all time is called Heavyweight. It's won multiple awards. It's from Gimlet Media, now owned by Spotify. I will warn you that you will cry. And I will give you the premise of this podcast. It is a podcast where the host, Jonathan Goldstein, who is a writer, a comedian, goes back to things that have happened to people that weigh heavily on them in their past and helps them resolve that issue. It is tear-wrenching. I have cried more times listening to this podcast than like any other podcast. It is very good. It's the best podcast. They're doing like updates to all of the stuff throughout the years right now, for shows that they've done, to like go back and revisit the people that they've helped and things. And it's very good. And I'm gonna give you a Magic podcast. And I want to preface it with, I know the sound quality is bad. I am aware that it is bad. But Javier Dominguez and Andrea Mengucci together sometimes have... I think Anthony Lee's on that podcast too. I don't think I know he is. I'm trying to pull up the name.
Magic with the Carnies.
Yes, thank you. I was like, it's something funny. Magic with the Carnies. It is... Their good moments are so good of the Magic podcasts left that like continue to produce, that are like trying to like dive deep into stuff. Their good moments are what you would expect from those level of players. And the sound quality is pretty bad, but it's worth the struggle. I will say that. Abe? Or do you guys have any thoughts on? I guess I don't know. You guys have probably never heard of Heavyweight, so
I haven't. I also just, I mean, to the censor, I have not been spending nearly as much time listening to podcasts in the last, I'll say, 2 years than I did in the 2 years before it, and the reason for that is that I've been just spending more time listening to music. But I will always vouch for, and I'm a huge proponent of, and I've learned a lot from, the Happiness Labs with Laurie Santos. She's a Yale professor who developed a really popular course at Yale in the mid 2010s called The Psychology of Happiness, about just happiness psychology and how you can change your behaviors and use the way that our brain is wired to increase the satisfaction you get out of things you do in your life, and ways to just make yourself happier. Really good listen. I would definitely recommend that. And then I'll also recommend Table for Two, which is probably my favorite Magic podcast of all time. I just think that it's a really great one for players of any level. I think Hayne really did a good job of not terms of the like level of thing he was talking about at any time in the podcast, but the way that he explains a lot of things he's thinking about is really accessible, and it's one that I always enjoy a listen to or re-listen to.
I have to text KYT now. Like, I literally just have to text him because you said it. You brought it up twice on this podcast. I was already going to text him, but it'll make.
I love Table for Two.
It'll make
It's
his
so
entire.
sad that,
I promise you, it will make his entire day when I text him, and I'm like, "Hey, I just want you."
and
to know.
I also think I want to say, since we're now talking about KYT, he does not get enough credit for being the perfect co-host.
One of
for
the
it.
godfathers of podcasting in Magic.
That too, but also just I think that like there's no one who could draw it out of Alex in the way that he did. I think that's the whole point of the show.
Yeah.
Is that it wouldn't have happened if not for KYT being able to have those kinds of conversation with Alex, and it's a really special show. If you love Magic and you love you want to hear some really good insights about it, that's the podcast I would recommend the most. Mason?
The only podcast I'm really listening to these days, because I'm not really listening to any podcasts outside of Broken by Concept, which is basically League of Legends CCMTG. They are basically us. They started around a similar time as us too, except their league, and they're younger than we are by like a year or two. But they are basically, they are less structured than us, and they just like have topics they talk about during the thing. But it's kind of the exact same vibe, and I really appreciate it. And it's really interesting to hear them tackle things that are beyond League of Legends and things that like kind of transfer over to the gaming space in general, something that we tackle every now and again. It's very, very good. I highly suggest if you know anything about League of Legends or play, I think it is as someone who comes from Magic content, they're the only content that even comes close to Magic's level. League of Legends content, for those that don't know, is garbage. It is just like not actually educational at all from basically anyone in the community, at least not to the level that like Magic players are used to. In fact, I've met a bunch of you via the Broken by Concept people in their Discord and stuff, and we've all commiserated, in DMs about how it's tough out there for League players who used to play Magic, or vice versa. They have a lot of wake up calls. As I had some friends recently get into Magic from over there, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, there's so much helpful content." I'm like, "Yeah, we're in the dark ages right now," and so, but I
this
highly
isn't even the good stuff.
Yeah, this is all we are in the like, holy cow, are we gonna make it age? But I also linked them the article we talked about a few weeks ago, like the mega article thing. So they had that as well. But either way, I really suggest it. And even if you don't, there are a lot of really good topics and episodes they have, and you can generally tell if you're curious just by looking at the title, and there'll be some like bigger picture idea, and they'll kind of just talk about that. I would highly suggest them if you're looking for something like that and you're out of Magic podcast. That's really the only one. The only other podcast I think I could suggest is Constructed Criticism. It's really good. It's a weekly podcast, and that's one that I listen to a lot.
Yeah, I think you listen to it live every week.
Yeah, I'm on the cutting room floor when it comes to the podcast.
I will say, because I didn't want to plug myself, that I do a weekly podcast called Need to Nerd, which is
You didn't want to plug yourself, and you plug at the end of it.
Well, I didn't want to do it during the question. I'm just gonna do it now.
This is funny.
I do a podcast. If you're like into nerd culture, it's more like pop culture, nerd culture type of stuff, and it's fun. We do it every week.
I mean, while you're plugging podcasts, anything else you want to plug there, Spencer?
Yeah, I'm a little late to post Concerted Clash here on the YouTube channel here, if you're watching there. We did Legacy just for funsies, just while we were waiting for stuff to change, and we'll be doing Standard this week. And you can follow me on Twitter at He's a Game. You can follow me everywhere else at Spencer13H. I had a Facebook memory today that I wanted to mention during this segment of, I might cry, of the time where I was doing limited time only with Danny Cathro, CCMPG with Michael Hinderocker. I had just come off of my first Pro Tour, and like I don't know. It was like, it felt like everything for constructive criticism, and I feel really lucky. You know, I never thought that it would get better than that, and as I was looking at it today, I was like, man, I'm really lucky to have Abe and Mason who do this with me every single week, and I'm kind of less active on the internet these days, so I wanted to take a moment during this part of the podcast to shout you two out, because I really appreciate it. Anyway,
Didn't think the show could get better. Didn't know I was out there.
Exactly. I didn't know.
Me and Mason were waiting in the wings. Mason, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can reach out to me for coaching via my Twitter, which I just mentioned, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com, and put coaching in the description. It's kind of weird. My next week is like fairly open for me. And the week after that, it starts to get busy again because a lot of people book multiple weeks out ahead of, Edge of Attorneys being released, want to get going. So if you're wanting to get in, sooner is better than later. So reach out there. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
Yeah, people can find me primarily over at Blue Sky. Username or nothings. You can also find me on Twitter, although I do not really post or use that platform much anymore, but I still do get notifications for DMs. So if you're reaching out to me for coaching or just looking to keep tabs on me, that is a place you can go as well. You can also reach out to me at morenothings@gmail.com if you're looking to set up anything for coaching in the coming months. That's going to do it for us here at Constructive Criticism for episode 566. We'll see you next week for another episode of Constructive Criticism.
Magic.